Welcome to the first session on artificial intelligence. This was and always will be the land of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also acknowledge all of the Indigenous leaders in our institution and Indigenous leaders and participants in the audience today. Thank you for all you do for the Australian community, for your communities, and for enabling our universities to be such an important part of the potential future of the Indigenous people of Australia. I'm joined this morning by Dr. Cathy Foley, the Chief Scientist of Australia. We have a very limited time, and Cathy was fairly adamant that I wouldn't read her CV to you, so that we could get on to your myriad questions that will arise. We're both known not to talk much, so we probably will.
Stop laughing.
Who's that? Is that you, Callum Drummond? Yeah. What we'd like to do is to start a conversation that then involves you in what we might call the positive dimensions of artificial intelligence. There are many negatives, there are many challenges, there are many issues, particularly around teaching and students and the flow of knowledge and the question of learning. And what Cathy's asked as Chief Scientist, rather than as Chief Teaching and Learning Officer of the country, is that we maybe traverse some territory here on the opportunities of artificial intelligence, not to deny the other dimensions, not by any means to deny the other dimensions, but to use the 40 minutes today to have a little bit of a blue sky look, and I think also to touch on some issues to do with the fundamentals of knowledge and who owns knowledge and the rights to knowledge and how we might mobilise ourselves in that regard. But of course I can't have the Chief Scientist of Australia on the stage without asking you about your response to the Accord. It is the thing of the moment. It does have a chapter on research. The Minister mentioned research last night, which was helpful. But I guess I've got two questions there. Firstly, just your reflex. You've seen the process. You've no doubt been part of the interrogation, gentle interrogation, we might call it, from Mary O'Kane and the rest of the panel. Any reflections you have on the process we got to and then the document and its content in terms of science?
Well, first of all, in following on from your acknowledgement of country, I think the thing which I thought was a real new aspect of it was the recognition of Indigenous knowledge and knowledge systems. I thought that was great to see that highlighted as a specific thing. So that's new, and we'll see with the science and research priorities for the country, similar sorts of thinking will come through that. So I think that's a real shift. But stepping away from that, I got a sense that we haven't had a focus on universities other than we want you to do more. We want you to be teaching our people, coming up with new knowledge, winning Nobel Prizes and starting businesses and making a prosperous economy, as well as educating for the future. And I don't know how any of you do this, but it's an extraordinary expectation on any workplace and on any organisation. And I think having a chance where effort has been put in, thinking about it, going through looking at what is the current status, what is the role and expectation of universities, it's a starting point. I think we shouldn't see that as, although I know the Minister talked about it as a blueprint, I think what it's got is flags to say these are things that are important, here are some pathways forward, but it's the beginning of a conversation. I would really urge universities to think about also what is it you don't do? Because I've got a sense that for too long we keep thinking that the universities will solve this problem, that somehow or other they keep adding on and expecting you to work the miracles, which I think you largely do. The fact that you're one of the biggest exports in the country in terms of education is remarkable. The contributions that the university sector makes in the funds that you raise through having excellent international students and the reputations you have has actually been an important contribution to Australia's ability to have research at the level and the volume that we have to be able to be recognised globally. And having strong universities, having strong research is really important for a country's reputation. to attract investment, to attract workforce, but also, I think, to make sure that the country is able to live to its ambitions. I did a national conversation on behalf of the government, which many of you were involved with, and thank you for this, on what are the most important things science and research needs for Australia to be the country we want it to be. And there was a deep recognition that research is part of the pathway for humanity to be successful and for Australia to be successful. And the role of the universities in that needs to be reinforced and supported. And I think this is, the beginning of that.
Well, thank you. That's the end of the session for today. We've got a transcript of that. Thank you, Cathy. I think that's very positive for our audience and the research and all the miracle makers in the room. It's not the first time in this conference that people, let's say, next to the sector have had that reference of the incredible span of activities of our universities. With a bit of nerves and sitting here in the middle of the light, I forgot to say, my name's Chris Moran and I'm the Vice-Chancellor of the University of New England. It's probably a good idea that Vice-Chancellors are a bit anonymous in this situation. Cathy, I had a specific question, and it may be unanswerable, but I think it's worth posing on the Accord, which is the Tertiary Education Commission looms large, depending on who you're listening to, and Mary O'Kane made this pretty clear in our first session, that it's kind of a backbone for her and other things flow from it. In a separate conversation, funding is the backbone and things flow. I think what we're all conscious of is that a Tertiary Education Commission, irrespective of the set of responsibilities it will have, and it's mooted here to have very significant responsibilities, will be expensive. And so there's a trade-off potentially here between rapid mobilisation of resources to some parts of the documents, recommendations around, say, needs-based funding and research are two that stand out. Do you think that our capabilities with artificial intelligence, our capabilities with large language models are such that we could use it to drive the design of an efficient tertiary education commission?
That's a really important question. And
someone's got that answer, lady, just email it in.
So look, I think the first thing is, before we go down that pathway, is I need to put the caveat on that I've worked at CSIRO all my working life. I think I talked at Oregon State University for 1 week when I was a graduate student, and I did 6 weeks of teaching first year accelerated physics at Sydney University in 1989 when I had my first child, and thought that when I had a 6-week-old baby, that'd be an easy thing to do when I was on maternity leave at 9 o'clock, 3 days a week. But so my experience with universities, other than being on panels and involved with the research sector, is limited when it comes to operations. So this is probably an interested person looking in. One of the things which I think I've learned along the way is this is an opportunity to have a clean sheet to say, if we were going to design the higher education system in Australia, and I mentioned what I think how important it is, this is a chance to sort of say, what is your purpose, what is your role and responsibility, and get those foundations right. And really if this is the way forward, to use this as a chance to do a reset, because it's once in several generations, I guess, that you get that chance. But then the other is to do it in a way where the world is different. It's very, just the way we teach post-COVID, the way, or I should say the way you teach post-COVID, the expectations of students about what does the future hold for them. I know in years gone by they've said kids like 5 years ago were expecting to have 14 different careers in their lifetime.
Did you ever believe that? I was a bit suspicious about that.
Yeah, I don't know where that came from, but just the fact people are banding that.
Yeah. So we want to have lifelong education, so we did that.
But that sort of what young people or old people coming into universities, what their expectations are is very different to what it was a long time ago. What tools there are to be able to support the people that work in the university sector. I have to say I am hugely concerned about the health and well-being of the average university anybody, from the top vice chancellors through to your tutors or casual teachers.
No, we're fine.
And what you have to deliver, and with the resources we've got the smartest people in the country under the university sector. and working in that area, and being able to use tools like AI in a way which is able to take some of the grunt out, where there's automation, where you can get that sorted. Thinking about, for example, I'm a scientist, so thinking about the design of our laboratories. Should we be really thinking in terms of what does automation look like? What does the ability to access information so that we're not going through manually to do our literature searches, that we're actually able to use AI tools, that becomes, it might end up being a service that's provided by someone else, but it's something where we are purposeful in how we think we can use these as the developers of them and the sort of the ones who are creating those who are going to work in those fields. You're actually almost like first in class to be able to use these tools in an experimental way and leading the world with that.
Thank you. It's a very thoughtful response. The key question, though, as we all know in playing with these tools, is that you can ask it to take on a personality. So what personality would you give the Tertiary Education Commission? Sort of more Trump-like, or a little bit more Albanese? Maybe Finkel. He's got a pretty engaging style. I think the Tertiary Education Commission with that sort of style would be interesting.
Yeah, so that'd be. Look, I think when I go back to that national conversation, it's very rare that anyone would have the privilege of doing this. So I went around, I probably talked to over 700 people, and many of you were involved when we got that information from the public. So I talked to, from my Joey Scout group, I got them to draw pictures, they're only 5 and 6 year olds, about what do you want Australia to be like? And it was quite extraordinary to see the variation from kids drawing power poles, worrying about energy, through to saving the whales, and kids wanting to be able to have friends. So that end, high school kids, universities, heads of government, Indigenous people in remote and rural Australia, local council members, a broad spectrum of politics as well. And now remember, this is in February to April last year. It was the desire for Australia to maintain its liberal democracy, to have values, maintain our values, to have equity and equality across the country. That came out in every single roundtable I had. It may have used different language, but that was it. Climate change came second, Indigenous acknowledgement came third, and health and wellbeing came fourth. So to give you a hint, it's pretty obvious what the priorities are going to look like. But the thing which was interesting was how important that whole idea of being a nation that really stands out and is cooperative, collaborative. And I think that's what I think we should be reflecting in a commission as not a Trump-like, or it's actually that idea that, it's almost like that quintessential Australian set of values comes through, and that's what I think you should be trying to achieve with such a commission.
But I agree with that. I think that so many of us today forget that the quintessential Australian values come essentially from our agrarian roots, from the regions and rural part, and it's often ignored in statistics about where people live. And now, my Vice Chancellor from a regional rural university, I know it should have that voice, and that has been coming through. Cathy, you've indicated today that you think, and we've started on this already, on the positives of AI, what it can give us, and how we can. I use the word enslave. It's probably a bit inappropriate for people who think that it might be sentient, but to use it to the ends of positive purpose. Can you elaborate a little bit about why you would like us to take that emphasis?
Look, I think the reason I'm doing it, there's twofold. The first one is, look, there's things happening by the government looking at regulatory stuff, and so it's not for me to get into that discussion. It's really good that the government is really being sensible in the way it's approaching this, being very consultative, and getting an expert committee to give a pathway forward. And so, look, I don't want to add to that because it's not appropriate. But one of the things which I've thought deeply about this over the holidays, over Christmas, and I actually think that we should be looking at the advent of AI, and you think of 30th of November 2022 was when the world changed. And I actually think we need to be looking at going back to the 15th century with the invention of the printing press. And that really changed the world. It went through, we had democratisation of information, we had democracies being created, we saw the beginnings of, sort of what's, is now modern society, but industries being created. And it was extraordinarily disruptive. And it also changed a whole lot of social norms. A really good example, the movie Name of the Rose is a really good example of it, where the monks didn't want to let go their power of holding knowledge in their libraries, and so were ready to murder for it to be able to maintain that hold of knowledge. That is something where I think we've got to see the advent of AI, machine learning, generative AI, even quantum capabilities as well. These new technologies are really flipping society in a way which means that people want to have information and deal with it. We've probably seen The Economist years ago talk about information being the new oil, or data being the new oil. And it's going to be something where we have to really recognise, what does this mean for us? And it's a chance to control it in a way that leads to the outcomes we want, rather than what we did a little bit with social media, is let it drive us. Because in the end, it's actually the multinationals and the big companies that monetize this stuff and then be able to drive things and maybe have the outcomes which weren't the ones we had. And I suppose the things which, we know that there are very, negative potential outcomes from the biases, because remember that a lot of the algorithms that are used, I think you said that it's not sentient. We've got to remember this is statistics. That's why we should teach more statistics at universities and make sure that everybody understands mathematics and statistics. But it's not sentient, it's not magic, it's not emotional. It's actually, basically statistics. And so therefore, we need to make sure that the way we design these algorithms are inclusive, and that's one thing. So that bias thing, when you think that a lot of these things are being designed by people living in Silicon Valley in California, it's that sort of focuses the mind on what these tools look like and how they might not lead us where we want to go to. So working out how we can make sure they're suitable for an Australian context.
Can't help it,
critical.
I'm just thinking about the monks of Google.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Well, next murder mystery coming up, yeah.
We get a little insight there, don't we, for those of us of sufficient age now, where we went from going to the library or waiting for the next issue of the journal to turn up.
That's right, sort of waiting. Remember the little thing which was a summary of every week that came out with the summary of all the contents lists of all the journals that, like, had the different physics ones and chemistry ones.
And we're all limited. We're all limited to a relatively small subset of literature, which were the journals that we were either taught to read or found in our discipline. And then almost overnight, e-libraries came and we started searching in a similar way, and all of a sudden all this other literature came in from different disciplines.
Especially the multidisciplinary
Spoiled
stuff.
a lot of great ideas for projects because, they'd been done in 1956. But nevertheless, I think we got a little bit of that sense of, I don't know if democratisation is the right word, but that accessibility to a much broader
It's
area.
not democratised because the only people who can really access it are those who are part of an academic library.
True, yeah.
And also, even within an academic library, where the subscriptions are.
Yeah.
So that's something where we've got some level of that, but true democratisation is when it was a huge shock to me when I joined this role, and thank you, CSIRO, for letting me have my CSIRO computer still, because public service does not access research literature. And how can you do a job where you're trying to do evidence-based policy?
So the National Library is not an access point for public service?
No.
I wasn't aware of that.
And they don't have big subscriptions to academic publications either.
So the Government of Australia works without access to our literature?
Well, you will find many of them are adjunct something or another's with all the universities.
And if any others want to be, let us know. No, seriously, they need access to what we do.
It's huge. Right? In fact, the number of times when I've talked about this issue with politicians, our ministers, they have, especially those who come...
we don't want them in the scientific literature.
No, but they're making decisions, and they're often going back, and they're making these decisions often on a Sunday night, getting ready for a cabinet meeting the next day.
Right.
And they want to get in, and many of them are well-educated, very experienced people. They want to get to the core of the information to understand it, because, to be honest, research literature is really quite well written, the good stuff, and it's
the ones you and I've written.
Yeah, I'm not sure about mine, but I'm sure yours is, Chris. But the thing is that it does allow people to see the real original information, and it's not been sort of either averaged out into a review or, but and I know, for example, when I talk to one of the ministers, actually two, who often have to make quite sensitive decisions, and they do want to get to the basis of that. They said they found it really frustrating, would find it really valuable for them to be able to get to that original paper that might say that something relating to the environment or for minerals or for energy, that they can actually get to the nub of it and get a sense of what's really written there.
Yeah, so we're close to a topic very close to your agenda. From day one as Chief Scientist, you started to talk about open access and the capturing of knowledge. You know, I think almost one morning we woke up in a black movie and two mega giant companies had hold the world to ransom for our knowledge, and we could have it back if we paid for it bit by bit by bit by bit by bit, and if we weren't prepared to pay for it, we couldn't have it. And then there's a third one that stole it all. And we thought this was a good idea because we could look at how many times we've been cited. It's Google Scholar, of course. So Google never paid for all that, as far as I'm aware, and then we have the other two big data sets. So the role here, the positive dimensions here of large language models and statistics breakthroughs, we might call them from now on open access. What's this nexus look like?
So look, this is something really interesting. Our Defence Science and Technology Group under Tanya Munro, they actually have a swag of subscriptions to journals, and they actually run machine learning or AI models to go through looking at getting information out, because there's just too much
Looking
information.
for secrets in there.
And well, just trying to understand the development of technologies, and quite often things can be buried in ways which you may miss because we're all human. But machine techniques, they're able to get in there and not make those mistakes. So so they've actually found that it's been hugely successful in being able to draw out information they did not get by doing it manually. So
And so they've only used their library subscription.
well, that's because of they've got their arrangement, because I'm not an expert at all in the copyright relating to this, and they must have some arrangement with the relevant publishers that allows them to do that. But the thing that really just jumped out at me was how successful it has been for them to be able to make or have an understanding of where technology is, where the science is, for them to be able to make decisions on opportunities for defence and security. So we've got an example where that's being done. But the Minister Karen Andrews at the time asked me, when I first came into this role, you get a letter saying these are the things they expect you to do. It's called the letter of expectation, which is sort of like your work list. And one of them was, can you do something about open access? And anyone who knows me, I never do things by half. So I think, oh, okay, let's really understand this. So for 3 years, or 2.5 years, went through and really did a deep deep study of this, talked to many of you, talked to the publishers, to broader...
Did you have to pay to talk to them?
No, they're actually quite interested in... They realise they've lost their social licence, and there's a lot happening around the world where they recognise their role, but they're also trying to figure out how they are able to be something which is recognised by the research community as being more valuable than most of us probably see them as. Organisations that make 40% profit, that they get their content for free, the peer review is done for nothing, and any of us who are editors-in-chief get paid probably, if we're lucky, $1 an hour or something like that, and they are making very large amounts of money. They're some of the most successful companies in the world, particularly the big publishers. So when you go through sort of looking at that, we've got a whole in-kind which we're providing to publishers. And I was thinking, how can we turn that around so that we get better value for our money? And so that's what I did, was go through and say, what are the things we could do? We could do nothing. We could have a mandated model, so that means everyone has to pay gold open access fees, which will just increase our costs for research in a way which isn't necessarily leading to anything more, and we're giving more money to publishers. We can have a repository model where we have a repository, but we know on average, you probably know, people actually applying and putting their stuff in and keeping it up to date you're lucky to get a 60% success on that.
Very lucky.
And it costs, for example, our medical institutes, many of them don't have repositories because they say they just can't afford them. It costs several $1 million to set up and about $1 million a year per organisation to maintain if you do it properly. So that's again adding on costs. So I've just come up with a an idea of saying, well, what if we do it a little bit differently? And I'm not saying that this is the way to do it, but I wanted to put an idea which was just saying, let's do a different model altogether. We're paying about $500 million a year to publishers across Australia with the public funded agencies. I've been going around asking anyone who might have a subscription, tell me how much you pay. And so I've worked out it's about $500 million a year, including open access fees and subscriptions. And it's sort of like confetti across the country as to all that money going individually. I know we've got the amazing Council of Australian University Librarians who've done a great job in creating transformative agreements, and that's been a big way forward. But wouldn't it be wonderful if we could think about how we could have more leverage with the publishers and maybe have a collective approach like we did with the PBS and for health subscriptions, instead of every pharmacy having a relationship with a pharmaceutical company, that we actually now bring it together and we've got much more bargaining power. So that's one of the ideas I've put forward. And it's with government at the moment. We'll see where it takes that. But it's the idea of, I think we've got to a point where we have to think differently about how we can make sure that this information that is created by Australia, but also we're only 4% of the world's research, so can we also get access to everybody else's work, both future and past catalogues, and make sure that our work is made available to everyone as well. How can we do that without increasing costs and making sure that we get better value for money? So that's what I'm trying to achieve with open access.
So we've only got a few minutes left. I'll just have a look through the questions here.
All right, yes.
If the printing, this is a nice one. If the printing press, from Anonymous, if the printing press brought democracy to us, what social change is AI likely to bring?
Oh, that's it. Well, that's really worrying. And this
That's a negative one. We'll filter that.
No. That's good. I think it's really important to talk about. I'm not just happy Cathy with where you have to have the glass half empty sometimes, but it's because you need to look at the whites of the eyes of how we actually look at this. Because if you think that you go back to Brexit, you go back to even Obama, if you read his autobiography, the use of social media at that stage was really an important part of him being able to be elected. There's no way an Obama would be elected in America today. And Brexit was one where, the idea of being able to get information and then being able to feed that back, where you can bring in, you can either create misinformation, disinformation, or focus people's access to information because of the algorithms. We all know that once you look at a cat video or something to do with princess somebody or another, that suddenly that's all you see. And if you looked at a particular dress on Instagram or something, every other dress of that sort, even though that was just a moment's
weakness.
Yes, all right. Wow. But the thing is that you can see, for example, when The Voice was on, if I just looked at my Instagram feed, 95% of people were thinking it was a yes vote, but clearly that wasn't the case. So it drives you down a very narrow view of things. So, how we actually make sure that we're using AI, which goes into social media, in ways which isn't going to lead to a dystopia, is going to be really important. And we really need to think clearly about this. And I want to raise the importance of universities here, because if you go back, and universities play an extraordinary role in our society. You do have people who you probably don't have time these days, but we'd like to make time for you to sit and think and take things beyond, have those deep discussions where at the moment we don't discuss things in society. It's either, this is my position, that's they're black and white, and it's not trying to say, well, where do we actually tease this out and have a true discussion? But in academia, that is where we should be. Well, that's the last place to be able to do that, and we need to do more of it. And I think this is where, if we're looking at where to next for universities, making sure that the ability to think, to really put it out there, saying this is what we could be doing, this is where humanities knowledge is, and use these tools like AI, quantum, whatever it is that's coming through, to be something we then build on, so that we, I remember when I was a kid at school, I used to know 100 phone numbers. I now know about one. I don't even know the phone number of my other, I've got a government phone and a personal phone. I don't even know what the phone number of my government phone number is because I can look it up.
It never rings. Oh,
that's true too. But the thing is that we use these things like you've got your mobile phone there. They're our brain extensions. And so how do we use these things to be positive brain extensions so that then as humanity, we can actually keep building on this to, do better, to think of these difficult things from whether it's, we heard before about energy transition. And one of the issues is that it's, we heard the importance of the social science, there's science, there's engineering, then there's a whole AI aspects to be able to manage the grid where we've got, instead of, a couple of power plants, we've got a whole lot of different, a million of them. So but when you look at the way universities are set up at the moment, they're very much structured around their disciplines. So what does a future university look like to break those down? If you're able to achieve that and then bring it to society, that's something which would be hugely important.
So there's a number of questions in here around curriculum and I could interpret those to mean that a really important dimension of what you've just talked about, which is how we reach learners and the opportunity here for wildly different pedagogies, not just in the sense of the acquisition of information via the model, but the design constructs that we use for how a learner will go about learning. I have a personal view that I think that science and research methodology is actually the way to go through the design process. Have you thought very much about that interface, the interface of kind of research thinking, research approach, and the way pedagogy might get transformed by AI?
Yeah. So look, this is really interesting. This came up actually with the National Conversation stuff, and it's really interesting what I learnt from engaging with Indigenous knowledge holders and traditional owners and the way they approach things. And that is a real systems thinking approach, so that we tend to be a bit thruster organiser in the way we get an idea and we want to action it. And instead of thinking, okay, I've got an idea, but how can we actually broaden this by having dialogue and figuring out what is the best way forward? And it's almost as though we've lost this. So how can we, and this is something which I guess is saying, is there an Australian way we could do research where we actually spend more time at the beginning, planning, talking, building relationships, the trust, before we start doing the doing? We don't actually pay for that in our research planning. When I was in CSIRO, we ran a thing called Future Science Platforms, and we did one called Active Integrated Matter, which was bringing robotics, materials, sensors, and AI together to solve major problems. And we got everyone to work out what the major problems were, and then got a multidisciplinary group to come together. And first of all, you had to, it was like the Tower of Babel. Everyone had to be able to talk to each other because different disciplines talk about the same things using different language. But the thing which was interesting, the people coming together said it was the most stressful 6 months of their life, because we said the first 6 months we're paying you to sit and design and think about this and then work out what is the killer thing you've got to do to say, is this a goer or not? Mm-hmm. And it was the most amazing research experience I've experienced, where great multidisciplinary research solved problems really fast, and then took it from this future science stuff where it was then used in the different parts of CSIRO, which are called business units, and was adopted very quickly in much shorter space of time. So that stopping and thinking before doing and building those relationships across different boundaries.
So you might surmise AI's pushing us quite the opposite way.
Yeah, and
by the resolution of the question, by the 5 semi-inane but semi-sensible dot points. Do you think the process you're talking about there creates a kind of a new dimension of knowledge, a new form of knowledge that can't be in the models because it's had nothing to learn on?
No, that's a good point.
Or is it in all of the other stuff that we're exchanging on social media and it's sort of hidden in between?
I wonder how we can actually draw on all of those. I don't know the answer to that, but it's something, I hope I'm just getting people to think about things. This is a moment in time where you've got the Accord that's come out saying, we value universities, they're a really important part of this. There's a chance for a clean sheet, I suppose, hopefully you see it that way, to design a university sector that can deliver, but also a research sector. I think we shouldn't forget that The universities are one part. A lot happens in industry, in government and in public funded agencies. So making sure that, and also I guess also bringing in Indigenous knowledge and knowledge systems too, because that's something which is a precious thing, which is a comparative advantage for the country, which we haven't recognised and respected. So, where we can bring those together. But it's going to take time, and the thing is, we never have time.
John Bullen's a Indigenous Whadjuk man from Curtin University, where I was working. He had a hypothesis that was, I think, testable, that the linearity of whitefellow thinking that's totally embedded in the models is so fundamentally different to the thinking patterns of many Indigenous people that actually it wouldn't necessarily capture Indigenous knowledge, and has probably not learned that. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a pretty interesting hypothesis.
Not to mention the respect of how their knowledge systems work, and the issues of ownership and IP and all that sort of stuff. So it's really complex.
Yeah, very, very complicated.
But I think we're getting into a world where complexity is sort of escalating. And we have to, as the smart people that are making up our university sector, we need you to think of in a complex way and being able to navigate that through, which is tough.
So to close the loop back to the beginning, just give us another task to do, which is where we started probably as the monks locked away, thinking deep thoughts and writing them down to each other. Dr. Cathy Foley, thank you very much. We've only touched the surface of an immense set of issues here. Thank you for coming and sharing your ideas with us.
Hopefully we've got people thinking. If nothing else, I'd be really pleased if you shoot me down in flames with ideas. It was more just trying to get ourselves thinking, rising above what we've been thinking about, and sort of saying, how can we, with this extraordinary capability in the country, mobilise it in a way that looks after those who are doing it, but also allowing that brain power to really be a superpower for the country.
Thank you very much. Can you thank our Chief Scientist, please?